Welcome to Perspective and Potential, where we uncover new ways to see the world and tap into the incredible potential within each of us. I'm Abigail Straight, joined by my co host and mother, Gwen Fund. Together, we'll explore ideas, stories, and strategies designed to help you grow, shift your perspective, and embrace a more complete version of yourself. So, whether you're ready for a big transformation or simply curious about the small steps you can take today, our goal is to inspire, encourage, and support you on your journey. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can check us out at perspectiveandpotential.com. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in and see where a new perspective might take you. Today, we're diving into an important and often misunderstood topic: child behavior. When we talk about child behavior, we're not just referring to everyday tantrums or occasional defiance. We're looking at the deeper issues that can arise during childhood and manifest as ongoing behavioral challenges. Many parents and caregivers struggle to determine whether a child's actions are simply part of a normal development or a sign of something more serious. But if that doesn't sound like you, keep listening, because the information that we're going to share today will also help you understand those who may be in such environments. In this episode, we're going to clear up common misconceptions about behavioral issues, explore the root causes behind them, and help parents recognize the difference between typical childhood struggles and behaviors that may indicate a deeper concern. So, as an educator, I've seen firsthand how essential it is for families and schools to work together when it comes to helping children grow, not just academically, but emotionally and behaviorally too. One of the most challenging things that we face in schools isn't just teaching math or reading, it's helping students learn how to manage their emotions, build respectful relationships, and responding appropriately in tough situations. And here's the truth: we can't do that in isolation. When the expectations at school aren't supported or reinforced at home, it creates confusion for the child and often more behavioral issues. So, to support our children well, we have to ask a deeper question. Why are they behaving this way in the first place? What's really going on under the surface when a child is acting out?
Well, all people, and not just children, do what they do for a reason. There's always some emotion or a need that we try to fill with our behaviors. So the environment, paired with the child's innate personality, can be expressed in many different behaviors. In our last episode on parenting, we talked about the different parenting styles. And today we're going to take a look at some behaviors in children that can result from insecure attachments and ineffective parenting approaches. So, in infancy, if you have a child who resists cuddling or who cries incessantly, or maybe just being too quiet or interactive, not very interactive, these children may be exhibiting behaviors related to insecure attachment, trauma, severe autism, or some other mental or physical health disorder. Toddlers, they can become very compulsive and rebellious in their behavior, or some may become fearful and avoidant to interact with others. They might initiate control battles. We call them terrible twos, temper tantrums, with their caregivers, or begin to use inappropriate language. And these can be the beginning of what we call survival behaviors. And these behaviors happen because there's a lack of a trust in others. They are overly independent. They can become aggressive and moody. And usually what we're looking at is attachment disorders. Maybe they're on the spectrum and other mental health issues, or it could be ineffective parenting. But then as the child grows, those behaviors can also grow. And they can be angry, destructive behaviors, or more passive behaviors like hiding, running away, or toilet issues. And then And of course, the preteen and teenage years, we will start to see substance abuse, conduct problems at home and at school, delinquency, maybe some gang involvement, violence, and even sexual assault behaviors.
Well, and what I want to just point out is that these behavioral patterns don't just emerge overnight. Most often, they're the result of, like what you said, years of unmet emotional needs or inconsistent discipline. But one common misconception that I want to just address is the thought that children will just grow out of it. Because in reality, behavior is a form of communication. I say that all the time to all of the schools and the parents and the principals that I work with, but behavior is a form of communication. Kids are telling us something with their actions, even if they can't verbalize it.
Well, that's true because there are so many things that can trigger behavioral problems in children. Of course, mental health issues, whether that's in the parent or the child, that can create a lot of frustration in parents and children. And that frustration can lead to overwhelming stress and disconnection between them. Of course, then you've got things like fetal alcohol syndrome or drug exposed babies. And unfortunately, they come packaged with actual physical ailments and disabilities that they're going to carry throughout their lives. Some of these children are born with a decreased ability for self control or an impaired ability to make wise choices. And unfortunately, many of them end up in institutions or in jail. And then neglect can happen in a lot of ways. The parent is addicted to a substance or an activity that consumes their focus and attention. They can fail to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, or medical care for the child, or failure to protect a child from risk when they're able to do so. And sometimes we see this like toddlers who are wandering the streets alone, or children who are running the streets at night unattended, teens that have no curfew.
So when you talk about neglect, I think So when you talk about neglect, some people may think only of extreme cases, but what are some subtle forms of neglect that parents may not realize are harmful?
Well, we talked about a laissez-faire parenting in the other one. That actually can result in neglect as the parents consistently allow the child to make decisions that they may not have the maturity to make safely. Children need to have direction on how to operate cooperatively within society. They need to learn empathy and how to be resilient as they interact with others. So their ability to form lasting connections can be impaired if they expect the world to play by only the rules that they make. So without this parental structure and guidance, these children can grow up to feel very entitled and they can experience a lot of frustration as they grow into adult situations and relationships. And then, of course, there's also abuse in its many forms. We immediately think of physical abuse, which might look like physical harm to the child through actual battering or aggressive physical restraint, or even sexual abuse. But the use of corporal punishment as a discipline is linked to behaviors in children such as running away, drug and alcohol use, delinquency, criminal conduct, and aggressive behaviors and sexual assaults.
And I think that's actually a really great point for educators to just take note of too. So, from your experience, what are some signs that a child might be reacting to trauma rather than just simply being defiant or disobedient?
Well, what we usually see is an extreme reaction, far above what might be expected. Sometimes these kids are in total dysregulation and have no ability to control their emotions. A lot of times, these kids react to even small triggers that other children would just simply shrug off. So, unexpected behaviors also, like maybe bathroom issues or sexual acting out. But emotional abuse is probably the most prevalent and also the hardest to recognize for most people. According to the American Humane Association, these are the things that emotional abuse can include: ignoring the child physically or psychologically, refusing to look at them or use their name, rejecting the child through denying their needs or ridiculing them, isolating a child from normal social interactions with peers or family, or exploiting or corrupting the child through teaching the child inappropriate or illegal behaviors. Verbal assaults, belittling the child, shaming them, ridiculing, or threatening them. There's also terrorizing. That's where they just create a climate of fear around the child, like putting their pet or a loved one at risk or getting rid of all their toys because of their behavior. Sometimes we set unrealistic expectations for children, and they're threatened with consequence if those expectations are not met. And of course, neglect is also considered emotional abuse. And this kind of abuse actually happens in all types of families. Usually it's because of stress, maybe poor parenting skills, lack of access to resources, or inappropriate expectations. And most commonly, I think it's generational family norms in childcare.
And I just want to pause on that point because I think it's important to note, like you mentioned, that sometimes people might be inadvertently carrying on these parenting traditions, so to speak, that they've just been taught, and so not with any malicious intent, but it still has an impact nonetheless. And so parents parent the way they were parented, unless there is intentional intervention or education that results in some sort of change or adjustment. And sometimes it's not just the parenting style, but the instability of the home itself that affects behavior, right?
Oh, yeah. So, domestic violence in the home, drug and alcohol abuse, any kind of illegal activities, or sometimes it's just parents who are not actively involved with their children. And some of that is due to the need to work long hours just to make ends meet, like single parenting, right? But in some cases, because other things are a greater priority for the parents than their children, like that cruise, or maybe climbing the corporate ladder. But when the child becomes secondary to the parents, then we can see that. And of course, divorce of the parents can and does trigger changes in the child's behavior and their emotions. They do suffer an emotional trauma that affects them and their relationships thereafter. There's a researcher named Judith S. Wallerstein who followed children of divorce for more than 20 years. And her observation in her book, The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce, is that the prevalence of divorce in our society has, quote, created new kinds of families in which relationships are fragile and unreliable. Children today receive far less nurturance, protection, and parenting than was their lot a few decades ago, end quote. But later on, she also says that many children of divorce will become estranged from their parents in adulthood, and they will have ongoing insecurities with their intimate relationships.
You know, I think that sometimes we overlook the emotional weight that kids carry when the adults in their life are navigating big transitions of their own. I myself tell my children all the time that please remember that your parents are human, that, we're trying to help you navigate the parts of your childhood, but as an adult, I'm still trying to navigate adult years that I've never experienced. But I think the responsibility that parents hold and just need to keep in mind that, especially when there's added stress in a child's life, like new parenting dynamics, inconsistent rules between households, or unresolved tension, those emotional cracks can start to show up as behavior problems in the classroom or at home. So I'd really love for you to walk us through how these transitions affect children emotionally and what parents can do to help ground them during these major shifts.
Okay, it's really interesting. It's not just emotional. There's actual physical consequences that come with these kind of environments that children grow up in. The Center for Disease Control has done a lot of research on the effects of these environmental factors on children. And they created a simple test called the Adverse Childhood Experience Test. It's very simple, 10-question test about their childhood experience before the age of 18. Now, it's important to note that this study was done in middle and upper class neighborhoods with college educated people who held good jobs and had great health care availability. This was not an inner city study. But what they found during the study was that certain traumatic factors had a stunning link to chronic diseases that people develop as adults, as well as social and emotional problems. They found that childhood trauma is really common. 2/3 of the people in that survey scored at least one on the test. And 87% of those who scored at least one scored more than one on this little 10-question survey. The study further noted that with an ACE score of 4 or more, there were serious implications for physical, social, and emotional disease. The likelihood of lung disease, hepatitis, depression, and suicide increased dramatically.
Wow. So then, how can knowing your own ACE score impact how you parent or even how you respond to other people's behavior?
Well, for myself and a lot of other people who have taken this test, it's like this big aha moment. So I've worked with parents who took the test and they were surprised by their own score. I truly believe that most people want to do right by their children. And I also believe that knowledge is power. And we all do the best that we can with what we know. Unfortunately, babies don't come with care manuals. And most of us just wing it, using our own experience as our guide. But with the declining attachment rates and soaring need for social intervention in families, I really think we're at a point of needing widespread education in parenting. The deficits are showing up in our homes, schools, communities, and with the soaring mental health needs that we have right now. There seems to be a lack of empathy levels. We see that they're rampant when we notice what's going on in our political and moral arenas. Our tolerance levels are declining as well. We're overstimulated, we're stressed, and parenting seems to be the one thing that we can put on the back burner to simmer while we put out the rest of the fires in our life. But we shouldn't, because there are physical, social, and emotional problems associated with an ACE score of 4 or more, including everything from heart disease to suicide. So with a score of 4 or more, people are more likely to adopt high-risk behaviors like smoking, alcoholism, illicit drug use, sexual promiscuity, unhealthy diets, physical inactivity, and suicide ideation. Adversity and chronic stress during childhood can have a negative effect on brain development, and it can change brain anatomy and function. We've already talked about how chronic stress can impair anyone's health, but this is developmental damage that might make permanent changes. So the common results that we see in children look like affect differences, attention and concentration issues, negative self image, lack of impulse control, aggression or risky behaviors. And of course, any or all of these behaviors will have a negative effect on the child's ability to be successful in their schoolwork or in relationship building. Healthy, nurturing parenting not only benefits the child, but it benefits the whole family climate as well. It's kind of like taking the time to sharpen your tools. Your work goes better the next day.
That's so true. And I just have to reference what we mentioned at the very beginning. Some parents are doing a pretty good job, but I think it's important to note that even if you have, by all observational standards, a functional family unit, there are so many people who aren't blessed with that opportunity, and there's still a responsibility for us as a community to make sure that we are understanding and support people who are in that situation. And so I want to put in a quick plug because, or rather, a heartfelt plea, that one of the hardest parts of all of this is that most people only see the surface of these problems. They see or hear about the outbursts, the defiance, the bad behavior that's happening at school, quote unquote, bad behavior, right? But what they don't see is the why. And I love how you've articulated the all of the impacts and the effects that are, stem from those that childhood neglect or the unmet emotional needs. What I typically see happen is that we respond to the what without ever really asking what happened to this child. Some of these kids have lived through really tough things, things that no child should ever have to experience. And if your child is blessed to be in a stable, loving household, I want to challenge you to use those situations that your child brings home from their day at school as a teaching moment. When your child comes home and says, so and so is always in trouble, or so and so got sent to the office again, instead of jumping into judgment or frustration, which also feeds that attention seeking behavior, and they will come home with more of those stories, by the way. If you feed the negative stories, they're going to come home with more of them. But I challenge our parents to say, I wonder if they're having a hard time. I wonder what's behind that behavior, because that one conversation could help your child learn empathy, perspective, and how to respond to difficult behaviors without taking them personally or judging and reacting with unkindness. We can't shield our kids from every difficult personality. They are going to encounter it when they step out into the real world. But we can teach them while they are in our household how to be grounded, compassionate, and emotionally wise. And that is how we will raise world changers.
And boy, we really need world changers. Our social service systems are overflowing with children from these dysfunctional environments. And of course, there's not enough funding to provide the needed resources. When you look at the costs for the law enforcement, healthcare, proper mental health treatment, and just the social service needs of foster parenting and adoption, we literally spend millions of dollars to alleviate the symptoms of this social emotional crisis without being able to effect a cure at the source. And consequently, the problem just keeps growing bigger. Now, thankfully, most little brains are somewhat plastic, and appropriate care can help them to improve their lives. But this is time intensive. And because they exhibit these behaviors that create secondary trauma in their caregivers, and in their teachers at school, I'm sure. The best parenting techniques are often not used on these children. Caregivers under stress tend to yell more, use more authoritarian methods, which are totally counterproductive to what the child needs. It's hard to understand, but an 8-year-old who didn't have the proper nurturance during those first 3 years of life, they need to experience that kind of care with an adult with whom they can learn to trust. They need soothing, and they need to learn how to self-soothe. They need a safe place and a person who will ground them the way a mother grounds her toddler as they begin to explore their world. They need that unconditional love and sacrifice that is very common for infants and toddlers. So we tend to think that they're old enough to just know better. But fighting the negative emotions of trauma makes it so difficult for them to go against their survival instincts. And while we do have many wonderful foster parents out there, it would be so much better for the children if their parents could make the necessary changes in their own life that would enable them to nurture their children in a healthy way.
And you said a couple of things. I think if this is the situation that you are in, right? Hopefully this does bring knowledge and awareness. If you are under high stress, I love how you said parenting can't go on the back burner. But wherever you're at, whatever your situation is, from a high stress, family transitioning situation to a fully functional, loving, stable household, we are the masters of our universe in that we can control what we can control. And so we need to take then the action that we can control. It's important to remember that growth and healing aren't quick fixes and that they don't happen in a vacuum. Both children and caregivers and parents and teachers, we're all on a journey. And while the road can be challenging, it's also full of potential for transformation. So every small step towards patience, understanding, and support makes a world of difference, not just for the child, but for the entire family. So, as we come to a close, let's pinpoint the most crucial points from our talk and consider how they apply to our daily lives. Today's conversation was a tough one, but such an important one. We talked about how behavioral issues in children are often rooted in trauma, unmet emotional needs, or a chaotic home environment. We explored what kids really need from the adults in their lives, especially when their behavior makes it hardest to love them. The truth is, this isn't just about schools or systems or those kids. It's about all of us, whether you're a parent, a teacher, a neighbor, or just someone who cares. We all have a role to play in creating environments where children can feel safe, seen, and supported. So here's our call to action. If you're a parent, partner with your child's school, reinforce behavior expectations at home, and model emotional awareness. If you're an adult in a child's life, look beyond the behavior and ask, what might this child be trying to communicate? And if your child is fortunate enough to grow up in a healthy home, teach them how to lead with empathy towards those who may not have that same foundation. Because when we raise emotionally intelligent children and compassionate communities, well, we all win. In our next episode, we are going to explore the topic of communication and how we can intentionally use this life skill to better our relationships. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. Your input helps shape the conversation and makes perspective and potential even more impactful. We're Gwen and Abby, and you've been listening to Perspective and Potential. Until next time, keep exploring new perspectives and remember that every small change can lead to something big. Food for thought.
Bon appetit.